And we're rolling.
All right, here we go. Strange, beautiful grass of green with your majestic silver seas, your mysterious mountains I wish to see closer. May I land my kinky machine?
Although your world wonders me, with your majestic and superior cackling hen, you are people I do not understand. So to you I shall put an end, and you never hear surf music again.
Those are the words of Jimi Hendrix that have been cited thousands of times, as if Jimmy was saying surf music had died in the 60s, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Hendrix was wrong.
Just like Motown for Detroit and reggae for Jamaica, it was local, regional music that came out of the lives of, young kids in Southern California.
The growth of surf music was really quite phenomenal. It started in 1961 in Southern California with only a handful of bands and a handful of recordings, and within a year or two, there were hundreds of recordings by hundreds of bands across the country.
In the beginning, it was just about the music and the surfers enjoying the music and embracing it and kind of claiming it as their own.
Surf music is a bunch of kids on a beach around a bonfire and just having the best time without any social obligations or school pressures, and there was no future and no war and no economy and nothing to worry about.
I was attracted to the simplicity and the energy of it. That's what rock and roll is and was simplicity and energy.
I dropped the flute like a hot potato because I loved the guitar.
Because there was no sound systems, we knew that we couldn't hear the voice anyway. And we were more interested in the melodic and in the power.
Surf music truly is rock instrumental with a reverb tank.
There's something about the sound of instrumental surf music that flips a switch with people. There's something magic that happens. Something magic that happens with the audience. They regress, they start feeling younger, they want to get up out of their seats and dance.
We had those amps. It was that kind of music where they didn't care. It was the fun of the music because it was loud.
There's no pretension, there's no hidden meanings, there's no message. It's just pure, unadulterated fun. In the early 60s, my family lived in Montclair, Southern California, a little dry, dusty town in the Inland Empire on the edge of the Mojave Desert. Montclair was removed from ground zero of surf music by 40 or 50 miles. But I got a transistor radio in 1959, and that opened up the world to me.
Here's 101, the king of the surf guitar, Dick Dale with Deltones.
And one day in 1961, I'm listening to KMEN in San Bernardino, and they were the first radio station to actually play Dick Dale's first record. Once I heard my first Dick Dale record, I was hooked on that kind of music, and I started collecting surf records left and right. And at the same time, I was learning how to play guitar. Bands like Dick Dale and the Deltones, the Challengers, Eddie and the Showmen, and the Bel-Airs, they were like my teachers. And a few years later, I realized that I had several thousand records. And I discovered that there had been surf bands from every state in the Union and from almost every overseas country. It was just an amazingly diverse form of music that had spread like wildfire. And so I wondered, Where did this music come from to begin with? What happened to it? Did it really go away? If it did, why?
The outside world didn't really view surfers all that much at first because there was just so few of them, and it was more or less seen as a he-man athletic pursuit that was very rare. Sometimes a dynamic, romantic photograph or drawing of surfers would appear on the travel magazines.
Surfing as a culture kind of flew in the face of mainstream culture. It was non-productive, kind of hedonistic, pleasure-seeking, responsibility-avoiding kind of thing. And no self-respecting parent would endorse their children pursuing that in exchange for school and career. Because our parents were all children of the Depression. For them, it was security. As a surfer, you were getting the idea that maybe that was a false god. Maybe there was other things that were important.
There was a real high priority on having a job. Everybody wanted to have a job and be productive and be contributing to society and all of that kind of thing. Well, if you said you were a surfer, it was like you were a dropout of that, and you were, sort of.
By the time surf music exploded in Southern California in the early 60s, surfing culture had pretty much been firmly established here, at least since the late 50s.
As surfers, we'd drive to the beach and we'd get jacked up to the music on the car radio. Interestingly, the music that we were surfing to at that time was probably jazz.
We'd get some beer, go to some guy's house, try and get some girls to come over and put on jazz records.
Like Herbie Man at the Village Gate, Miles Davis, Henry Mancini, the theme to Peter Gunn, theme to Black Saddle.
In Newport was a place called the Rendezvous Ballroom. And my parents found out about the Rendezvous and started taking me there when I was maybe 14. And during a wonderful several-year period, I heard every major big band that would come through. Gene Krupa's band and Les Brown, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey. To be there on the bandstand and watching the band and the vocalists and the drummers and all that was, God, it was marvelous. And then we start going down to the lighthouse in Hermosa Beach. And there's a bunch of guys from the Stan Kenton Orchestra that are playing. There's Shelly Manns, the drummer, Howard Rumsey on bass, Connie Condoli, trumpet, Shorty Rogers, trumpet, Bob Cooper, sax, Bud Shank, sax. And one of the more innovative filmmakers was Bruce Brown. And Bruce Brown would go down to the lighthouse because that's where the jazz was played.
The reason that jazz was adapted to surfing by surfers was that it had kind of a lyrical, flowing, surf-like environment it created. And surfing the wave was sort of improvisational, and jazz was improvisational. It was about virtuosity. And jazz was about individual instrumental virtuosity. So there were really lots of kind of symbiotic aspects of the two forms of expression.
These artists like Henry Mancini, Les Baxter, and Martin Denny were looking for an atmosphere, and that atmosphere really gelled with beach culture and ultimately surf culture.
It really wasn't as much of an idea of a California culture. It was like a transplanted Hawaiian thing. They had like kooky luau's down at the beach. They kind of wanted to be like Hawaiians.
In that kind of later 50s time frame, the fact that the board went from a 100-pound piece of dense wood to a light 30 or 40-pound fiberglass balsa wood board. Surfboards became even more accessible when foam came out in '59, so they could make as many boards as they needed to fill the demand. This board had gone from maybe 500, 1,500 surfers to 5 or 6 or 7 or 8,000 surfers. And that's where it was when the movie Gidget came out.
One day I came to Malibu and there was a shack there, and I think Harry Stonelake and Tubesteak built it. Different guys would hang out there because there was some shade. Terry Tracy, who was living there, was married and lived elsewhere, like Inglewood or something. He was at the shack a lot, and he would just hang there, you know, and hang out with guys and get them to buy him some beer and stuff like that. And he named Gidget.
There was a girl midget that arrived on the scene and sets up headquarters. What she does, she goes home and tells her daddy all this stuff. Her daddy writes a book.
I remember the day that my father picked me up at Malibu and drove me home. It was in the Dynaflow Buick, because my board was sticking out of the back. And I turned to him and I said, I'd like to write a story about what's going on at Malibu. And my father said, why don't you tell me everything and I'll write the story for you. I'm the writer. So I started telling him that I was called Gidget at Malibu, which meant girl midget. I told him about Terry Tubesteak Tracy that lived in a shack with Harry Stonelake. And I told him how incredibly interesting the lifestyle that I saw at Malibu was. It was all about what was outside, and I thought the whole sort of lifestyle was fascinating, that there were surfboards, there were young men, there was somebody living in a shack, and we were waiting for the wave.
That book really was, I don't know, they're going bitch and rocket bombs and go Gidget, go shoot the curl. God, can you believe that? I can't.
Columbia Studios bought the rights to the novel, and in 1959, the Hollywood version hits theaters nationwide.
The movie comes out, everybody loved the movie except for guess whom? Surfers.
The movie Gidget was kind of interesting. These days, it would be poo-pooed. The surfers would sneeze at it. But when it came out, it was the first acknowledgement by the mainstream world of surfing.
The theme song to the movie was sung by James Darren. It became a top 100 hit record in the spring of 1959.
When the Gidget film comes out, a teenage culture emerges in a completely different environment. You're not seeing skyscrapers, you're not seeing buildings, you're not seeing metal microphones. You're seeing a shack in the sand next to water and luminous waves that people are zooming in and out of with these little boards. This is just unprecedented, and no one's seen anything like this.
It made me cool, and it glorified the surf culture, even though it did it sort of in a dorky way. Every time Hollywood touches surfing, they goof it up. Even when surfers try to do surfing, they don't get it right. So when Hollywood does it, what are they gonna get?
So, surfers were listening to jazz and rhythm and blues, but where was the surf music?
There was no such thing as surf music at the time. I'd never heard that expression, surf music. That maybe somebody had a bongo drum.
When you're in the water and Malibu is 6 to 8 feet, you're out there and here comes a set. I guarantee you're not gonna sit there saying, oh, bro, this is music to surf. You don't do that, you just take off on waves.
Surfing films of the 1950s were not seen by all that many people. Bud Brown had been making surfing movies from about 1942 or 43 and showing them just at, lifeguard stations. Greg Knoll was making little tiny films called Search for Surf. Just before Gidget came out, Bruce Brown was doing his first movie, Slippery When Wet. Gidget gives the ability for these people to make full-length features and draw larger audiences. Once Gidget becomes popular, teenagers that are into rock and roll start gravitating towards surfing.
In the surf movies, they wouldn't have music synced on the footage itself. It was just, they'd turn on the projector.
He was just putting an album on, and he put on the soundtrack to Peter Gunn.
The Mancini-Peter Gunn thing was used for big waves at Sunset Beach. We'd be looking at the screen, and you'd see this wave, and you couldn't really tell what was going on with it. And all of a sudden, you see a couple of ants sweep up the face, and the driving boom, 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 boom. And my God, those waves 25 feet. And, you just get jacked out of your mind. And so you started to see a lot of interesting things come about from the filmmakers. For instance, I remember John Severson in a film sequence at Sakis of a hot offshore morning having Kemp Auberg play flamenco guitar.
I honestly think that Bud Brown was probably the first person to connect instrumental music to the surf culture, because he acquired the Fireballs music right when it came out in the late 50s. And he immediately started playing those albums with his movies.
Things were changing. Civil rights movement was getting going. Folk music was getting big. The Kingston Trio came along. So there were all these kind of hints at what was going to be developing culturally in the 60s. It was still kind of in its youth. Kids weren't really paying that much attention. They were just doing their thing. But in reality, 1959, 1960 was a pretty bland period musically.
What you were hearing on the radio just before surf music broke was mostly teen idols and heavily orchestrated material.
That was the era of Frankie Avalon and Bobby Rydell, what are generally regarded as the ones who tamed rock and roll down to where it was safe, and the early days of the dangerous stuff were kind of over, and it was still about 4 years before the Beatles came along.
With Elvis in the Army and Chuck Berry, busted by the Mann Act, and Little Richard finding religion, Jerry Lee Lewis getting busted for having a wife who was 13. On the flip side of that, big rock and roll stars were gone. We started to hear instrumental rock and roll about 1956 with Bill Doggett and Honky Tonk. And then Bill Justice had Raunchy in '57, and that had a really neat little echoey Nashville sort of guitar twang to it. And that was really exploited by Duane Eddy, who came out with Rebel Rouser in 1958. On the flip side of that, you had Link Wray with Rawhide and Rumble and eventually Jack the Ripper. Then there was Johnny and the Hurricanes with their full band organ, saxophone, guitar riffs. The Fireballs were from New Mexico, a little more Tex-Mex style. And I started getting some really tough rock and roll sounds that were based in guitar.
As a young guitar player, what really held the fascination for me and the cool factor was this new sound, this instrumental guitar-led rock and roll.
I was particularly attracted to the instrumental players, Duane Eddy, Link Wray. That was probably the most vital stuff that was going on at that time. It was spontaneous and exciting, and they pretty much started the kind of music that evolved into surf music in California.
And ultimately that led to the Ventures. The Ventures had Walk Don't Run, which was like the Fireballs, a straight guitar sound with no saxophone. And that was like the shot around the world in 1960.
Walk Don't Run was a national top 10 record that inspired and influenced thousands of kids learning how to play guitar at the time, myself included. And all of the bands that we played in would play Walk Don't Run, as well as all of the other guitar-dominant instrumentals that we were hearing on the radio at the time.
So it was 1955 that I found, and my dad went crazy, a 1941 WLD flathead Harley. It was like it just came out of the military the way it was. It was wild. I lived in Southwest LA. My buddy Ray said to me one day, he said, let's go down to Balboa and check out the babes. So we went on down there and pulled into that town, and it was something like Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it had the ferry that would take you across the channel to Balboa Island. You were on a peninsula that was 3 miles long. Because of our motorcycles, I guess we scared some of the people maybe, and the police invited us to leave. So we left and came back in the car, brought our guitars with us, a couple of guitars.
Well, as you walk down Balboa Boulevard, you have the fun zone on the left, which is bordering the bay, and you have the Rendezvous on the right. And after you've passed the Balboa Theater, you're at the rinky-dink. This is an area that was populated with people coming down for Easter break, for the summertime. We were playing at the rinky-dink on weekends. Our audience became primarily surfers, and these were people that heard about us from other surfers, from other people, even from Dick.
Everybody that was there looked at least like they were part of the surf culture. So this looked like a surf culture happening.
The Vox was for adults. The Prison of Socrates was for folk music. So the kids had no place to go. So when we moved to the Rendezvous, we were a magnet.
Dick didn't set out to be a surf guitarist. He wanted to be a country western singer. What happened was that he started playing at the Rendezvous Ballroom. Even though he wanted to be up there singing, the kids say, we'll play an instrumental. Next week, Dick Dale was playing this song called Let's Go Trippin' that he made up.
The kids used to say, let's go trippin' down to the beach to hear Dick Dale play. So he wrote a song about it, and it became an anthem.
And from that grew another instrumental and grew another instrumental. And Dick wasn't calling it the surf music, he was calling it the Dick Dale sound.
When we went to the Rendezvous, we went there to listen to the music and to dance and to just be part of the celebration of all of us having the common interest of surfing and surf music.
I was surfing with 17 surfers, and I said, I'm playing tonight at the Rendezvous Ballroom. It's the biggest ballroom on the peninsula. Come on down and have fun. 17 surfers, that was my first audience. They go, you're the king, man. You're the king. That sound on your guitar.
Once we heard the Dick Dale surfer thing, it was like there's no turning back.
We had started surf music.
Miserlou was an Eastern Mediterranean folk song that had been around for centuries.
But I took it from listening to my uncle playing on an oud, the traditional way, where it goes dum da dum da dum 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 da dum da dum 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 dum, and the belly dancers would come out. And I said, well, that's too slow to play. So why don't I do the Gene Krupa drumming picking? So I went, that's how that came to be.
And this song comes on the radio, and I had never heard anything like that before. It really changed everything. So all of a sudden, kids are talking about who's going to drive this weekend to go down to the Rendezvous, to go to a Dick Dale stomp.
He was awesome. Dick Dale was obviously a big influence, and we would all go down there and watch him, every Friday and Saturday night. Everything was tight, strong, with an attitude. With the combination of the bass, the rhythm guitar, and the drums gave that animal feel to it.
Dick Dale's sound was just totally unique from anything I'd ever heard before. The sound was intense, and it was big.
Our music was identified as surf music in 1960, and we didn't have a name for the band yet. And it happened that Dick's sister, Shirley, invited people to suggest names, and somehow the name Deltones came out. So we were called Dick Dale and the Deltones. Later, it was changed to Dick Dale and his Deltones.
We just started filling up the place.
Playing with the Deltones was just the gas. It was like a dream come true. I mean, I never thought in a million years that I would end up doing anything like that. And for a guy with all the little surf girls around, the place being packed, just seeing the lines of kids around the block, waiting to get in. I didn't care about getting paid. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to be a part of it.
We had a new sound. Dick emphasized being loud.
I wanted that tribal sound, and I couldn't find an amp that was powerful enough to sound like Gene Krupa's drums until I met Leo Fender. He was like Einstein. And he says, here, I just made this and we're trying to get the bugs out of it. Why don't you bang on it and tell me what you think of it? That gave me this big tribal thunder where I'm going dun dun da dun 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 da dun 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 da dun like that. Leo used to say, If it can withstand the barrage of punishment of Dick Dale, then it is fit for the human consumption.
Leo Fender listened and worked with musicians at the time. It was the work he did with Dick Dale that led to the revolutionary development of the Showmen amplifier, the most powerful amplifier at the time. He also worked with Dick to develop the Fender Reverb unit in 1961. This was a device that gave a wet, kind of a drippy sound to the guitar, and later that sound became strongly associated with the sound of surf music.
As soon as we started playing, they were on the dance floor. Everybody reacted to the music, obviously, or they wouldn't be lining up to get in.
You could see that everybody was feeling the music, not listening to it, but feeling the music. And thus, they started the surfer stomp that went along with it.
Of course, you couldn't miss the sound of the surfer stomp. I remember it as couples, you know, facing each other, just stomping away, kind of shuffling. It was an old wooden floor at the Rendezvous. The floor would move up and down. You could kind of feel the whole building moving. You know, it's sweaty, it's hot, they're stomping, it's loud. It was great.
It built up to 4,000 people a night, and I kept adding to my band, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Our music attracted some attention with the city officials.
They said the guitar music was evil and devil music.
There was a suggestion that we leave town.
They fired me, and they didn't realize that people were standing out in line coming in from all these places to watch us do what we were doing.
And all of a sudden, bands started playing this new style of rock and roll that Dick Dale and the Deltones were doing, this sound called surf music.
We were hanging around Torrance Beach in the early summer of '61, and I kept hearing the surfers there talking about, hey man, are you going down to the Rendezvous this weekend? We're going down to see Dick Dale, you know. I had no idea what it was all about. We went down ourselves to see what was going on. I was blown away. I met this guy, Eddie Bertrand, on a school bus in 1959, and we discovered that we were both fledgling guitarists, both Duane Eddy fans.
So we got together and played guitars one day and went, wow, this is really neat.
I developed a style of rhythm guitar playing that covered both the drums and the bass because I wanted it to sound complete with just Eddie and I. And that, ironically, came to sort of be regarded as the surf style of rhythm playing. The sound that we got just fascinated us. So we got a drummer and we got a sax player.
It became a band. It was, you know, just decided we needed to be a band.
I was still learning my basic chords, and I was just learning how to play a bar position B flat. And I was switching back and forth between that and the D minor chord. I started hearing this melody in my head to go with that. Right about that time, there was this wrestler in LA called Mr. Moto.
That's the name for the song, so we titled it Mr. Moto.
Mr. Moto was one of the first 45 RPM records I bought as a kid. I really liked the chord changes and the melody. It was probably the first instrumental I learned how to play on the guitar.
I did the musical arrangements, and Eddie played the lead guitar, and Delvey was the business manager.
I said to him, would you guys like to make some money? And they said, sure. So I booked this sock hop at the high school I was going to.
The first dance we threw, we passed out flyers around the beach, and sure enough, we got about 200 kids to come. You know, most of them were the surfers. I remember one surfer came up to me and he simply said, wow, man, your music sounds like it feels out there on a wave. You ought to call it surf music.
I don't know if the Bel-Airs ever considered themselves a surf band at first. I think people who were digging the band kind of just tagged us that.
The world of surfing claimed us, so to speak, as theirs.
We went from 200 kids at the beginning of the summer to 1,500 kids at the end of the summer.
We made an amazing amount of money. I couldn't believe it, being a kid and making all this money every time we did a dance.
The first dance we threw, I remember going home and we had about 600 bucks. We threw it out all on a mattress and we're like, you know, doing this with it.
We played it at a party and took that money and went to Hollywood and decided to make a record.
We rented some time at Liberty Recording Studio, went in, spent about an hour or two and recorded 5 tracks.
Mr. Moto had 2 takes because I didn't like how I played the chorus. Other than that, it was all first takes and we were out the door.
The record came out and it didn't do anything for like 6 months.
So we started hyping the record to the radio stations. We got our friends to call in and request it.
And at that time, KRLA was running these things where they played the top 10 from high schools every night on Sam Riddle's show.
Came on at 9 o'clock every night. It was called Topic Youth. And every night, he would highlight a different high school, and he would play the top 10 records that that high school submitted. We started creating these phony surveys.
So I sent in a list of the top 10. Of course, Mr. Moto was number 1.
I created a whole bogus top 10 for the Redondo High School where I was going. And that night, it was all about Redondo High School, and Mr. Moto was number 1 on the Redondo High School survey.
And then one night he plays the top 10 from Palos Verdes High School. And he says, I don't know who you guys are, but good luck, and there it goes. And I went, just nuts.
If you saw the movie That Thing You Do, you know exactly what it was like for a bunch of young kids to hear the song playing on the radio. I mean, I got a big boost. Every morning at 8 o'clock as I'm getting ready to go to school, I could turn on the radio and hear Mr. Moto. Big thrill.
After Mr. Moto became a small hit, next thing you know, I'm getting phone calls from the parents in the group trying to tell me what their direction is for the group. And some of these people I'd never even talked to. I got real upset, and my mother says, well, quit the band. Start another one. I said, I can't do that. And I remember crying.
Something happened to kind of split that group apart, and that something that happened was the Fender reverb unit. Eddie Bertrand decided he really wanted to start using that to modify his sound in the band. Paul Johnson, the other guitar player, really didn't want to go in that direction. So there was a separation of the ways. And Eddie Bertrand left the group to form Eddie and the Showmen and continue with his powerful reverb-driven guitar instrumentals.
Squad car, going on 2.
Squad Car was written by Paul Johnson, but Eddie recorded the most powerful and frantic version of the song that became a local radio hit.
It was kind of an easy thing to do, and it all happened within probably a couple, 3 weeks after the Bel-Airs broke up. We played the Rendezvous Ballroom in Balboa, and we just kept playing louder and louder and louder. By the end of the night, that speaker was shredded. I thought, well, I'll go to Fender. He'll fix this. Showed up, and he looks up, he says, now how can I help you? I said, well, I have a Bandmaster piggyback, and I ripped the speaker to shreds. I was just thinking, what if we put 2 speakers in there? And he said, tell you what, you leave that stuff with me. I'll give you something to play out of until then. Went back in 2 weeks, and here's this cabinet with 2 speakers in it. And I played it. And I went, my God, this thing just sounds huge. The last thing Leo said to me, whatever you do, don't tell anybody what we've done because we don't produce these amps. Other musicians would come like, bam, up to the stage and, what's that? And I'd say, what's what? Anyway, within probably a month, I'm guessing, it became the standard Bandmaster. Had 212s from then on.
He wanted to model his sound after Dick Dale's sound. He was totally blown away by the power of that Fender guitar, reverb, and amp combination. They really got a foothold locally when they became the house band at the Retail Clerks Hall in Buena Park and started to attract as many kids there, actually on weekends, as Dick Dale was bringing to Harmony Park.
In November of 1962, we came out with an album called Surfer's Choice. A number of the songs on the album were recorded at the Harmony Park Ballroom in Anaheim.
In 1963, Dick Dale and the Deltones were having such success that they booked a tour up and down the East Coast.
Ground, X-ray 1, radio check, taxi to 1-2.
Must have been 63, where we had a small tour back east. Mainly we played at this nightclub in New Jersey. And of course, it was a drinking crowd, much different crowd than we had in Southern California. And when we went on stage and played, it was like we were from Mars. They could not relate to this music.
Now here's the youngster you read about recently in Life magazine. Here from Boston and Quincy, Mass, and now the coast, Dick Dale surfing and a swinging. So let's have a fine hand.
When I looked at the heavens, they were moving in fast. I knew I better make it, cause they just don't last. I'm surfing, yeah, swinging and a surfing.
It was a disappointment for Dick.
We had to play behind a curtain, and while Dick was up front. It's probably because they didn't want to pay us union scale or whatever.
Let's have a nice hand for these youngsters to go off, okay?
Capitol, in their wisdom, had decided that they didn't want to use the Deltones on the records. They wanted to use studio players. Big mistake, I think. Dick said, well, if I can't have my band, I got to have at least one of my guys, and he chose me, thankfully. While we were back east,
Let's go surfing now, everybody's learning how. Come on and safari with me. Come on and safari with me. Early in the morning, we'll be starting out.
the Beach Boys had like their first hit.
The talk around the beach was, who are these Grammys? You know, the whole feeling behind it was that these guys were just a bunch of inlanders who were trying to jump on the trend as it was developing. It only sounded vaguely like it related to the kind of music we were playing. There was a big question mark as to how authentic this was. In fact, some of the surfers were so annoyed this was candy coating and commercializing the sport. And I remember hearing a bunch of surfers saying, hey, let's go beat those guys up.
You know, this is my favorite sport next to skydiving.
Look what just drove up.
Looks like a couple of senior citizen dropouts.
The Beach Boys were booed. Vegetables and fruit were thrown at them on the stage by the surfers because they thought they were, quote, rank. Who wants to hear these stupid lyrics? It wasn't heavy duty. It wasn't power.
I remember listening to the radio and going, how do they get to spread the word about surf music? And here we are trying to do it, and here's Dick, the innovator, the father of surf music. You know, he doesn't get to partake in spreading this word.
Dick Dale is the originator, not one of the originators, the originator.
Here are the challengers.
Everybody's talking about the seventh son in the whole wide world. There is only one.
I just quit, walked away from the Bel-Airs, and I started the Challengers. I was booking these little Legion halls, and I'd call up the Pepsi company, they'd bring down a truck. I'd call Brian Wilson and have him come down, and so it'd be us and the Beach Boys, and next thing you know, the place was crowded, and then cops, and then fights would break out. And then that was the last time we could use that hall. That happened to us about 3 or 4 times.
The Challengers were the hardest working band. We backed more artists, made more recordings than all of the bands combined. We were always the dependable band that could back you live and then do our show and draw a certain number of people to the venue. So that really set the stage for credible appearances on television and radio. And we would play the theme song for Lloyd Thaxton's TV show.
My name is Lloyd Thaxton.
The Lloyd Thaxton Show was hugely popular here in Southern California. We would all rush home from high school to watch Lloyd Thaxton. His was the only TV dance hop that featured surf music on a regular basis, including the Challengers. In fact, they asked him to endorse their second album, Surfing with the Challengers.
Be careful what you say.
I played what I wanted to play, and it just so happened that I liked the music that the kids liked.
Here they are, the astronauts. Yeah.
Most shows came from New York, and they had the New York look. No one ever saw the surf music back east. They didn't see this. Well, they could come to California by turning on their television set and watching the Lloyd Thaxton Show. That's what made surfing move out of Southern California to go all across the nation and eventually all over the world.
And it happened because of the Dick Dales, happened because of the Challengers. They brought the surf to me.
The Challengers gained a national reputation and became one of the most successful surf instrumental bands by virtue of their many appearances on local TV shows and syndicated TV shows like Hollywood A Go-Go and Shebang.
On behalf of myself and the rest of the guys in the group, we would like to thank you all for making our song, Pipeline, such a big hit throughout the nation. We would like to play it for you now.
What ended up becoming Pipeline, it was at one time called 44 Magnum. Next time we called it Liberty's Whip, but we went to this Bruce Brown movie. They showed this sequence of Bonsai Pipeline, and we're going, whoa, this is cool. Why don't we call this song Pipeline?
The first time I heard the opening glissando to Pipeline, I was impressed. It was the first time I'd heard anything like that. And as a result of Pipeline, the glissando became a standard technique used by surf bands.
When Pipeline came out, we were playing at the Rendezvous Ballroom. We'd have thousands of people in there doing the surfer stomp.
All the surfers would show up in the Hirachis, and the whole place would start rocking because everybody was stomping on the floor.
It was wild, frenzied dancing, you know. Just people would just let themselves go.
Every time I walked into that retail clerk's hall or the Rendezvous, either one of those giant places, I would have to hold my ears, and it would take me 10 or 15 minutes just to get through the dB level that was being pumped through that room.
Everyone sort of jumped up and down in unison to the music, and the building would move like a wooden gym floor, and it was flexible. And I think it bounced the musicians on the stage from the crowd going up and down.
The Rendezvous was a lot of fun, but also kind of dangerous. But there were confrontations between the people from the beach and the inland people. And I can remember going out and dancing, and some big, nasty-looking biker-type ho-dad coming up to me and saying, "You dance shitty."
A whole line of people would link arms, and then facing them was another line. They would run up to the other line. They would come up like this and go back. Destined for trouble.
This guy got in a fight with this other guy. One of the fighter's girlfriends got involved and started mouthing at the other guy, and then all of a sudden this guy pulled out a switchblade and stabbed at the guy and missed him and hit the girl, and it went into her eye or something. And my girlfriend and I just fled and never went back.
Surf music was a male-dominated cultural event. And that's why Kathy Marshall's presence on the scene was extremely significant. She could have been a huge star if the future had unfolded a bit differently, but she does deserve a unique place in the history books. Kathy never released a commercial recording, but she went in the studio with Eddie and the Showmen to record a demo of Bullseye.
Being a girl and playing guitar, I don't know if I was good enough to have said, come on in, let's play like a guy. But it also rubbed me wrong when, oh, you're really good for a girl. Because I didn't want to be good for a girl. I wanted to be as good as the guys. My grandmother had a little get-together on a Sunday afternoon, and she invited one of her friends, and he brought his electric guitar. I just was mesmerized. The transistor radio was how I learned how to play the guitar.
From the golden world of gas and the 1510 Music Man, here's a pick hit for you.
I would come home from school, turn on the transistor radio, pick up my guitar, and learn whatever song was on the radio. I was so devoted to it, and I think my mom could see me getting better at it. It was her suggestion that I take guitar lessons. The first time I heard a surf band live was the time I played with one. My sister was having a graduation party at her house, and so they hired a local band called the Bel-Airs. And my mom mentioned that I played guitar. Their manager says, oh, well, let me hear her. So I sat down and I played Pipeline. So the day of the party, I got up and I played with the Bel-Airs. When the party was over with, their manager said to my mom, I don't think I've ever seen a girl rock and roll electric guitar player before. What do you think about her playing with the Blazers? And she said, okay. The Blazers, they were all surfers. We'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. My mom would take us all down to Huntington Beach. They would surf and we'd sit on the beach and just play our guitars. It was surf music. Retail Clerks Union Hall in Buena Park. And it was like the Mecca for all the stars to go. It's the first time I ever saw Eddie and the Showmen play. Eddie and the Showmen, to me, were like a huge step up in musician quality, and I was kind of in awe of them. He was a good-looking guy. What impressed me more was his presence. Just before the Righteous Brothers were to go on, Eddie's dad came to my mom and said, would she go on with Eddie and the Showmen? And my mom said yes. I would play a lick, and then he'd play a lick. It was like a battle going back and forth. And then the next thing I know, he started stepping on my licks. And I walked up to his guitar like I was really gonna watch him play, and I just pulled his plug. I was so mad, I just yanked his plug out. After that, I had a really good following it because of this little rivalry that went on between Eddie and I from that point on. I was 14, Eddie was 18 or 19, and our relationship was rocky at times. I don't want to say love-hate relationship. I mean, I cared for him, and I think he liked me, and I liked him. It seemed like he resented me at times, but he always tried to help me, too. And he was the star, because he had the presence. He was very patient with me.
Dave and the Marksmen, Eddie and the Showmen, and Kathy Marshall went out on the road and toured California like a little review. And it was just like one big happy family having a great time on the road like that.
We had some really great times on those tours. The first time I heard Dick Dale play live was the day I played with him. I was not allowed to go to Harmony Park, which is where his venue was most of the time. Harmony Park had a reputation of being a kind of a rough place, so I never got to see him in person. My manager booked me to play with him at the Huntington Pavilion, and I was scared to death. So I had heard stories that he's very rough and he's not a nice guy and all this stuff. When they brought me up on stage, he was playing with me at the same time. He was just like being a rhythm guitar player playing behind me. And he stopped what he was doing, and he walked over and he stood there for a minute, you know, in front of the whole crowd, and then he threw his hands up like he couldn't compete, and went over and put his guitar down and then stood off to the side.
I gave her a title. I called her Queen of the Surf Guitar.
I never heard of another girl rock and roll electric guitar player at the time. I was an anomaly. I mean, it was something very different. I didn't think about being well known or being even compared to someone like Dick Dale. And my impetus was, I just want to play guitar.
Gather around, kids, and I'll tell you a story on how you can become a blonde-haired surfer boy. You grab yourself a surfboard, swimsuit and all, and hop into your Woody and find them 10 feet tall.
None of us really could comprehend how big it was going to get.
Giddy up, 409. Watch out for those stingrays in 427.
Within a short period, the large movie studios saw an opportunity and started producing teen exploitation movies in the form of beach party films.
The mainstream jumped on it and began to merchandise the heck out of it.
It was just like in the movies. Those depictions of fights and stuff like that, those fights actually happen.
Beach Party with Frankie and Annette.
Beach party tonight.
That made more money than Cleopatra did. So find the beauty in commercialism. The good part is they woke up the world to the world of surfing.
And that blew it up into a hula hoop, kind of fad from which it never recovered.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you, Mixtures. And, just about ready?
Eddie and the Showmen got to do the Hollywood Bowl, which in itself was insane.
I'd like to tell you about Eddie and the Showmen.
I walked out, and here's 10,000 plus people.
These boys come from the South Bay, Palos Verdes.
The feeling I had was like, whoa.
All right, Eddie, tell them what you're going to play.
Is surfing a fun sport?
There was a period of time you could open up Time magazine, Sports Illustrated, and surfing was included as part of mainstream America.
It just became an industry, just like music business.
And they got swept up into this romantic wave that if you go out west, it's not movie stars, it's the bees, it's blondes, it's surf music, it's all the freedom that you could ask for because there wasn't anything else on the horizon yet.
The media just glamorized it even more, but it was glamorous.
There was this desire for everybody to have this identity with this surf culture.
Because suddenly you were bleaching your hair, you had a flat top with a little bit of peroxide on it, so you looked like you'd been to the beach, but you haven't been there, but you look like it.
Kids would drive around in the Midwest during the United States with half a surfboard hanging out the trunk of the car to emulate being a surfer, and they'd never seen the ocean.
The surfing community at the time wasn't really thrilled about going national, having surfing get that big, because now it's bringing a lot of people who aren't really true surfers into the field, but it happened because of the music.
In 1961, there was a literal explosion of bands and dances and 45 RPM records. Within a short period, thousands of garages across Southern California began to fill with teenagers who were eager to form their own bands and jump on this new phenomenon. The 45 RPM record became a way for these bands to market themselves and their music. The number of recordings steadily escalated and peaked during the summer of 1963, but only a handful found their way onto the radio, and even fewer were picked up by major labels and became hit records, such as Pipeline by the Shantays or Wipeout by the Surfaris.
Ronnie, being the consummate musician he was, starts this drum beat, and we go, well, we better put some chords and a melody to this because it'll be a drum solo if we don't.
Got a shingle from the roof. Bob cracked it over his knees, sounded like a surfboard cracking, and then Dale had this crazy laugh that he did at parties.
Pretty soon, Wipeout went worldwide.
So we were having a really good time. Then,
when the Beatles came out, surf music suffered a lot.
The Beatles changed everything. I don't think people wanted to sit and just listen to instruments anymore. They wanted lyrics and they wanted voice. The songs, instead of being about Surfer Girl or your hot rod, it became, you know, protest songs, and it just became a very unhopeful time.
The surf bands, for the most part, just sort of like one day they were not there anymore.
The marketing people were just gearing up to really cash in on the surf culture when the Beatles showed up.
I had other bands after the Bel-Airs in the surf vein, but it all was gone by 1965. The folk rock thing was just starting, and I jumped on that.
Lyrics tell you what to think. Instrumental music doesn't. It gives you the freedom to think what you want and go where you will. That's why I loved instrumental music.
To me, it was bubblegum because, once again, we were doing this rock and roll and rhythm and blues.
The artists that were just breaking out, climbing up the charts, it was just like they hit a brick wall.
In 1966, the Rendezvous Ballroom, the legendary home to Dick Dale and the birthplace of surf music, burned to the ground.
Surf music should never be anything but fun. It just happened that it ended, and it couldn't support, it couldn't pay its way anymore.
The music changed and the people changed and their attitudes changed.
And you never hear surf music again.
Jimi Hendrix may have been right. Surf music experienced an existential crisis. The music of the 70s was characterized by long, drawn-out solos, overproduced arrangements, conceptual album music with hidden meaning. And there was disco. I mean, it just seemed like nobody was interested in surf music anymore. But that wasn't true for me. So it occurred to me one day that it might be fun to put a band together and make a surf record, which is something I wanted to do back in the 60s, but I never had the chance.
Surf music had died a long time ago. Nobody even knew what surf music was.
There were no surf music crowds. There was no such thing. Always the Beach Boys, big name band like that, and Jan and Dean probably were doing something somewhere.
You know, as time went by in the music in the 70s, everything was overblown, overproduced, big guitar, big hair, and I think people started getting tired of that.
I think the main appeal of John and the Night Riders, it was just the pulse. It was primal to the nth power.
This was recorded at a friend's house in Orange County on a 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder. And I took the tape into Los Angeles to have it pressed up by a record company, and I asked them to do it on blue vinyl because I thought it looked cool.
I took this record and I drove it to K-Rock, which were in Pasadena. I walked right into the control room and I said, hey, you gotta play this record. And they put it on and they played it immediately right on the spot. That's how cool the station was.
And then we booked a studio in Los Angeles and recorded what eventually became Surf Beat 80. This album hadn't been out longer than a couple of months when I had a phone call from a concert promoter who wanted to hire us to open a big show at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium.
Well, it's historically known as the concert that revived surf music. It was the Surf Punks and Dick Dale at the Santa Monica Civic, and we're the opening act. John the Night Riders, we were like doing lightning speed versions of, I mean, we were like, you know, surf music on drugs or something. That just opened the door. All the LA bands like the Go-Go's and Missing Persons, they all wanted John and the Night Riders to open for them.
All right, surf's up! More and more people were picking up on this sound. I mean, in the 1960s, I don't believe any surf band ever played at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And yet, in the 80s, several surf bands played at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
The only gigs they could even get were with areas of the punk rock audience. And if John and the Night Riders came out and rocked, they'd slam dance to them too.
As long as you ducked the beer cans, it was fun.
It's a very exciting time in Hollywood. A lot of punk bands playing. LA Weekly and Band Magazine and all these trades were talking about the band.
The punk scene had been given birth. You had X and the Germs. That whole scene was going on.
People have just embraced it again into this whole era, the early 80s. But when you got off into surf punk world, and we just found our little slot right in that.
So there was a whole instrumental revival like nobody'd ever seen before, and it started happening all over the world.
All of a sudden, John says, okay, guys, we're going to Europe. That was almost shocking. Are these people nuts? They want surf music in Europe?
That first show that we did in Holland was at a huge rockabilly festival.
At the time, what was very current and trendy and popular in Holland was the Clark Gable movie, Gone with the Wind. And they were all like into this southern motif.
We were playing in a very large hall, and there must have been several thousand rockabilly fans there. And I remember being constantly booed by the audience.
And then a bunch of German rockabilly guys were kind of yelling at us, like, rockabilly, man, rockabilly. The promoter had told us before we left, you need to learn the song of the South, surf style.
So we flew right off into Dixie.
The moment we did that song, that crowd erupted and loved us.
Everybody in the crowd, man, just started waving flags and everybody started cheering.
The crowd did a complete 180-degree change in their attitude, and we walked off that stage as heroes.
I think if we wouldn't have done that, they may have, stormed the stage. John and the Night Riders may have never come back to America,
I remember thinking on the flight home that European audiences really weren't that much different than those in the States. It was obvious to me that surf music had a universal appeal. There was a place for it in the pop music scene. We came home to do more tours, make more records, and played more venues. Throughout the 80s, new surf bands continued to form. Bands like the Surf Raiders, Paul Johnson and the Packards, the Evasions, the Surf Punks, the Insect Surfers, and the Malibus were among a growing number of surf bands that all helped to draw attention to the music. Dick Dale was featured in a segment on KABC's Eye on LA. He was interviewed at his home in Newport Beach when he felt he was ready for a comeback after battling cancer and being absent from the concert scene throughout the 1970s. And he did come back to tour and record again.
It's really great to see somebody make a comeback like that.
The Ventures, who toured exclusively in Japan for years, returned to U.S. stages after a decade of absence. Reunion concerts were held.
Bel-Airs.
And people remembered the fun again. And then something happened in 1994 that sparked the popularity of surf music to a greater degree than ever before.
The Best Picture of the Cannes Film Festival.
For just sheer, like, rock charge viscera, I think it would have to be Mr. Lou.
Pulp Fiction really cemented surf music into the consciousness of the world.
As a result, surf bands started forming in even greater numbers all across the globe. This time period became known as the Third Wave.
All around Europe, the same story is repeating. Pulp Fiction, who really presented the surf music to a wider audience. Instead of using the word surf music, a lot of people now, so you're playing Pulp Fiction music.
Founded in the late 80s, the Huntington Beach International Surfing Museum continues to support the surf music community with Sunday afternoon concerts during the summer. For the last several years, Livorno, a small Tuscany town on the west coast of Italy, has been the location for a huge 3-day international surf music event called the Surfer Joe Festival.
Well, the Surfer Joe Summer Festival was born from my idea a few years ago with the purpose to put together all the Italian surf bands. But people was thinking that I was crazy, trying to put together shows and push the entire surf music movement in Italy. We had the first festival in 2003, and the festival was absolutely great.
Los Straitjackets have recorded over 13 albums to date and have appeared several times on the Conan O'Brien Show. Not surprisingly, they're hugely popular in Mexico.
The first time Los Straitjackets went to Mexico, we weren't sure how they were going to receive us, if they would have thought that we were making fun of them or something, which we weren't. We were inspired by their culture. There were 2 shows, one in Mexico City and one in Guadalajara, and they were both sold out. It was a shock. We had no idea we were that popular there.
Dick Dale started to tour, headlined in Vegas, and made records again. And every so often, I'd hear about surf bands popping up in some of the most surprising places, like Japan, Finland, Croatia, countries you'd never expect to hear surf music from.
そして僕たちみたいな、割とそのミクチャー的な、サーフロックやってるバンドって大体3つぐらいに分かれてると思います。本当に昔のスタイルというか、ヴィンテージのギターとか、ヴィンテージのドラムとか。
The appeal of the music was cross-cultural and even more diverse than before. Surf music had experienced a full-fledged revival. It became obvious to me that surf music was very much alive with a universal appeal that I hadn't imagined a few years earlier.
Surf music is my life, unfortunately.
Surf music, for me, it's a religious life form. It just gets in your heart, it gets in your soul, it gets in your spirit.
For me, it's my childhood. It takes me back. It's all in the melody and the beat.
It's still all about escapism, enjoying the moment, dancing, having fun.
Even though we're slowly losing the pioneers and the people who first played around with this, it's bigger than it's ever been, by far.
The spirit of surf music fans has not been dampened by the test of time. That spirit still represents all of the things that made the sound of surf popular in the days before the Beatles.
It's commonly assumed that when Jimmy said that you'll never hear surf music ever again, that he was saying, we're here now and screw you, but he apparently was a really big fan of Dick Dale. And the real reason he said it was there had been a false news report at the time that Dick Dale was ill and dying.
I had collapsed, and then I was at the hospital. Jimmy was recording at the time. Hey, I heard Dale did a no-show. And his guitar player said, no, man, he's dying. And then Jimmy said, man, says, you'll never hear surf music again. But he knew what a fighter I was. And he said,
that sounds like a lie to me.
I have that on tape somewhere.
The king of surf guitar has passed away. Dick Dale led the way for generations. Dale performed at blazing speeds until the end. Dick Dale was 81 years old.
You'll never hear surf music again. That's a big lie.
That's about it.